Hello and welcome to my channel, I Went to Lose Gaming. The end user license agreement of the Knights of Favonius, aka EULA, is having her rerun well in advance of what everyone was expecting. In today's video, I'll be going over 31 things to consider for EULA's rerun. Let's hop right into the sneeze gate with the super obvious things to consider. EULA is, in my opinion, one of the best looking characters in the game. EULA's exploration passive can save you a ton of resin in the long run by giving you 10% more purple talent books. EULA is pretty good for exploration, having strong auto attacks to take out overworld mobs, being a claymore user to break ores, and finally having a tall character model and thus having the second best sprint in the game. EULA is cryo and thus she makes up half of cryo resonance, which is an amazing resonance providing 15% crit rate against enemies with cryo on them. EULA's cryo vision also makes up half of super conduct, which is perfect because EULA is one of the best physical DPS characters in the game. Now that we've gotten those super obvious things to consider out of the way, let's start by talking about the elephant in the room, EULA's burst. EULA's burst leads to cascading benefits and cascading problems. First of all, EULA's burst is one of the most unique in the entire game, allowing you to build up stacks to store power in a mini sword pet until it explodes, doing huge damage. This damage is considered backloaded damage, which is often considered to be a negative. However, longtime EULA players will know by now that it being backloaded is more of a different mechanic than specifically being strictly a disadvantage. Now, a quick caveat about her burst, you need to do damage with her autos to build stacks, so hitting elemental shields or invincible enemies does not add to her stack count. With that aside, the most obvious use case for building stacks is against the Primo Geovishap, who takes tiny bits of damage while it's getting up from its nap. This allows you to blow up the Primo Geovishap the moment it wakes up. Another use case for this backloaded mechanic is against the Magokenki, which doesn't allow you to build stacks against its first phase, since it's invincible. However, while it's transitioning into its second phase, it then allows you to build stacks since your damage still registers, and you're able to blow up the Magokenki the moment it's done transitioning to its second phase. And finally, by using her burst, this also provides a quick second Grimheart stack for EULA, which you can use a hold E to quickly wipe out the current wave, and then use the burst's backloaded damage to wipe out the second wave. Anyway, these are just 3 examples, and my point here is that her backloaded damage has a lot of unique applications, and if you enjoy being creative and applying this unique mechanic, then EULA's backloaded burst is best described as different, having both advantages to being backloaded as well as disadvantages. But now let's talk about the biggest disadvantage of her burst, and that is its steep 80 energy cost. On top of it costing 80 energy, EULA's elemental skill doesn't generate very many particles. This leads to energy issues for her, which leads to the following: requiring energy recharge, requiring a battery, or more often than not, requiring both energy recharge and a battery. Speaking of energy issues, that's the perfect segue into talking about building EULA. EULA is a hyper carry and really enjoys having the best artifacts you can provide her. As such, she wants as much crit rate, crit damage, and some bonus energy recharge substat rolls on a Pale Flame 4-piece set or a 2-piece Bloodstained and 2-piece Pale Flame combination. Either way, you better be committed to farming some amazing artifacts for EULA if you want her to shine, because if you do get those amazing artifacts, EULA will reward you with some of the largest damage numbers you have ever seen on your account. Now let's talk about Bennett. Since Bennett is very likely to be on Albedo's banner and perhaps EULA's banner, you may be presented with the opportunity to Constellation 6 your Bennett. If you plan to use Bennett a lot with EULA, and also you plan to rely on her basic attacks, then avoid activating Constellation 6 on Bennett unless you know what you're doing. Constellation 6 Bennett messes up EULA's normal attacks. The next subject I'm sure all of you are interested in is whether or not I think EULA is a good free-to-play character. Well, both yes and no. Yes, in the sense that EULA is still a great character at Constellation 0 with free-to-play weapons like the Snow Tomb Star Silver or the Titanic Tuna fish thing, a luxurious sea lord, that's what it's called. However, the difference between a Constellation 0 EULA with a giant fish and a Constellation 6 EULA with a Refinement 5, let's say Song of Broken Pines, is simply staggering. EULA goes from a great DPS character at Constellation Constellation 0 to absolutely broken at Constellation 6. So if you're the type that doesn't like the huge power gap between a free-to-play version of a character and a whale version of a character, EULA might not be the best option. But if EULA is often reran unexpectedly like this, you might be able to save enough Primo Gems eventually to bring her to that broken Constellation 6 level in a few years. Anyway, next let's talk about the fact that EULA is a physical DPS character. Physical DPS characters currently have the unique niche of nothing being completely immune to physical damage. On the flip side, more monsters are resistant to physical damage than with any other damage type. All the robots, I believe, resist physical damage from, 30 to 70%. Geovishaps of all sizes also resist physical damage. Even enemies you wouldn't expect, like the Cryo and Pyro Regisvines, have increased physical resistance. On the flip side to this though, most of the humanoid enemies are more vulnerable to physical damage, having negative 20% physical resistance. And to continue to talk about resistances, physical damage has the most easily accessible method of reducing resistance through superconduct, and by a whopping 40% at that. EULA's own elemental skill also reduces physical resistance, and there are many additional highly accessible ways to reduce an enemy's physical resistance. A recently trending mechanic for new DPS characters is an increased resistance to interruption, colloquially known as super armor, but also known as poise. Don't worry, even I don't fully understand the poise mechanic yet, but just know that EULA becomes really difficult to knock around while her burst is active. This is massively beneficial for tanking stuff to build stacks for her burst. In layman's terms, EULA has some very effective super armor during her burst. Alright, so a lot of theory crafters like to meme on this part of EULA's kit, and they do have a point. EULA's burst is RNG on top of RNG on top of RNG. Allow me to explain. First, depending on the enemy you're fighting, their AI can mess you up. Oftentimes, this is sometimes at least partially random, like when a Sasin Mage decides to teleport, when the Magu Kenki decides to teleport, etc, etc. This can cause your burst to miss. On top of the RNG enemy AI, your burst can also not crit. And lastly, her Constellation 6 is random as well. This RNG on top of RNG on top of RNG can lead to many resets, and thus it helps to be mentally prepared for this if you want to achieve your perfect EULA run. Going back to focusing on her burst a bit, EULA's burst is incredibly flexible. You can always swap off early. Once you've built the proper number of stacks to one-shot whatever it is you're fighting, you can always build more stacks to do a much larger nuke for much tougher enemies. Essentially, you have a burst that can do around 60,000 to 1 million damage at your fingertips. Next, let's talk about her absolute maximum potential. The reality is, EULA is one of the single best characters in the game for speedrunning at whale levels. In fact, recently, even a Constellation 1 EULA managed to make it to 12th place. But really, it's Constellation 6 EULA that dominates speedruns. EULA has broken record after record after record in Genshin Impact. She holds the highest amount of damage done by a single character in the entire game, and she holds numerous world record times across many Abyss chambers and floors. And with the release of the Raiden Shogun, well, the two of them work amazingly well together, alternating absolute destruction across all of Abyss. Overall, EULA is currently one of the best speedrunning characters in the entire game. So there you go, my long list of things to consider for EULA's rerun. And as usual, allow me to wrap up this type of video with a quick summary of everything I've talked about, starting with EULA's pros. EULA is one of the best waifus in the game. EULA has many benefits for your general and overworld playthrough. Claimer for ores, a good sprint, and a passive that saves you resin. EULA is Cryo, which is half of Superconduct. Cryo Resonance is also very strong. EULA is the best physical DPS character in the game. EULA is a hyper carry. EULA is still strong at Constellation 0, and EULA is absolutely broken at Constellation 6. EULA has super armor, and nothing fully resists physical damage. EULA has easy access to lots of physical resistant shred. Humanoids are more vulnerable to physical damage, and she has the strongest burst in the entire game. Her backloaded damage can be used creatively, and is actually ideal for many situations. EULA provides super rewarding damage per thumbnails. EULA is one of the best speedrunning characters in the entire game. And a couple of honorable mentions, you can Dragon Strike for her for a change of pace and for some fun. She also pairs well with almost any Electro character, especially Raiden, and she works well with the Electro Traveler, Fischl, Beidou, and Lisa. But every character has their cons, and EULA is no exception. EULA's burst has a very steep 80 energy cost, and EULA happens to have poor cryoparticle generation. EULA being a hyper carry means that she needs tons of artifact farming for a good balance of crit stats and energy recharge. EULA is not the most free-to-play friendly character, in the sense that Constellation 0 and Constellation 6 have a huge gap in power. EULA is doubly not free-to-play friendly, in the sense that free-to-play weapons are far inferior to whale weapons, but the Serpent Spine is a good option for dolphins. Next, lots of enemies heavily resist physical damage, and her backloaded burst damage can be an issue in many situations. EULA has higher RNG than usual with her burst, whether it's from the enemy AI, or if it's from crit fishing, or even from stack count. While EULA's normal attacks are decent, without her burst, she does a lot less overall DPS. Constellation 6 Bennett messes with EULA's normal attacks, and a few honorable mentions: she is a mediocre shield breaker, she has a somewhat riskier playstyle when you want to face tank stuff to build stacks for her burst, and last but not least, I would consider EULA to be a quote-unquote advanced character in Genshin Impact, requiring more creativity and knowledge of the game to fully draw out her power. All in all, EULA is an incredible character with very clear strengths and weaknesses. The end user license agreement has been one of my favorite characters in Genshin Impact, both for her grace and for her unparalleled power. With great power comes great responsibility, and in my opinion, if you need a main DPS character that can literally kill any monster currently in the game, EULA is a great option for that. Also, I regularly make Genshin Impact videos, ranging from C0 showcases, DPS showdowns, guide videos, and more. So be sure to smash the subscribe button, as it's the best and easiest way for you to support my work. Also, don't forget to like the video and leave a comment for the YouTube algorithm. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Went to Lose, signing out.